Welcome to Mach 10 Sports in this December 12th, 2023 episode, getting close to the end of the year. Again, you're going to hear me keep saying it. You're going to hear me keep saying it. Busiest time of the year in college athletics right now. Portal season, OVs midweek for all these teams, especially with the transfer portal kids coming in throughout the middle of the week. I mean, if not, go look up any or wherever you get all your news for Ole Miss athletics. Ole Miss on Rivals, Ole Miss on 247, Ole Miss on two, Ole Miss on 3, all those. Walter Nolan, OV, and Princely Milan, the edge defender from Florida. He's there. We'll talk about that in a minute. Bowl games, bowl prep. It's all Georgia starts next week. So we got a lot going on right now for media, for these college programs, basketball, football. I'm about ready. I'm going to get on the horn here in a minute, and I should say in a minute, tomorrow morning, and talk with somebody who's been in a bunch of Alabama's baseball scrimmages. I'm starting to prep for the college baseball season coming up, and it feels like it's a long time away, but 2 months will be first pitch out there. So I'm about to start prepping for that. So we have a lot going on. What isn't going on now or right now out there in the world of college athletics? And I also have a 3-week-old son. So it's been going nonstop, 100 miles per hour. Really since rivalry week here. But you know what? That's why we do it, to bring you the action. And I hope you enjoy the stuff we are bringing towards you. But before we officially get going around the SEC, let me send that text message out. We should be good. No guest today. Just Han Solo, yours truly here. So brace with me. We have a lot to cover. A lot of transfer portal, a lot of going around the SEC. But hey, let's get to it. Like I mentioned, around the SEC, if you're an Ole Miss fan, be getting fired up here, hearing some big things, some big waves that could be shaking up here on the defensive side of the ball for the Rebs. Walter Nolan, the big interior defensive tackle for Texas A&M, future first rounder most likely if he keeps his head above water. Those guys aren't in the portal a lot. They're unicorns. Disruptive interior pass rushers like Walter Nolan with his upside are not in the portal every year. Big thing right there. Princely, UMMNLA, sorry for the mispronunciation, Princely, if you're out there watching. He OV'd Ole Miss this week. Word is Ole Miss is trending well for him. And then edge defender Tyler Barron from Tennessee. Sounds like Tyler Barron's leaning towards Ole Miss. There's a lot going on with Ole Miss right now. The collective, the Grove Collective, the what is it called? They just have a lot of money coming in, a lot of support for Lane Kiffin. That's all I can say right now. I feel good about them getting all 3 of Walter Nolan, Princely, and Tyler Barron, if I'm being honest. The Real Tree is doing a good job backing Ole Miss right now. They just are. So Ole Miss is kind of getting whatever they want right now. If Ole Miss gets these guys defensively, I'm telling you, look out. This could not only be an easy preseason top 10 team, maybe potentially top 5 team. And you may not have been paying attention there because I'm going through around the SEC, a lot of portal updates. You're like, what did he just say? Ole Miss top 5? Ole Miss top 5. Trey Harris back on offense. Jackson Dart back. Quinshon Judkins. Ulysses Bentley. Caden Priestcorn. You get these 3 guys. They got JJ Pegues. They got some guys. Ole Miss going to be pretty good next year if they get these guys. Either way, they're going to be pretty good. I think they're for sure a top 10 preseason team, and it's preseason, and we still got another whole portal window in the spring and to finish the one through January 3rd. So we've got a long way to go, but things look great if you're an Ole Miss Rebel right now. Be on the lookout for those 3 guys. If they had to sign today, all 3 of those guys would sign with Ole Miss, and this may be Ole Miss's best defensive front they've had since maybe that 2008 group with Parade Jerry, Greg Hardy, those kind of guys. Just telling you. On the hiring front, Alabama has hired Michigan linebacker coach George Hilo. I know this isn't portal, but I saw it on the ticker before I got on the show. Worked with George at Georgia, does a fantastic job. Speaking of Ole Miss, he played Ole Miss special teams demon for Ole Miss. Go YouTube him. Incredible kickoff special teams highlights. I'm telling you, plays like a player with his head on fire or hair on fire. Jeremy Pruitt guy was at Alabama in 2012 initially. Went to Florida State with Pruitt, Georgia with Pruitt. Didn't go to Tennessee. Recently, Michigan's linebackers coach. So he's starting right now, and I think that was by plan. So, I mean, George Hilo, don't know if he'll take Cameron Hutzler's spot as the outside linebacker coach at Alabama, but maybe it's kind kind of looks like right now. He may be the new outside linebackers coach for Cameron Hutzler. It's leaving Alabama to go be the defensive coordinator under Jeff Levy at Mississippi State. Big hire for George Hilo. Has some playoff implications. Former Michigan coach when Jim Harbaugh was there. Jalen Milroe, staying on Alabama, announces on the next round that showed Jim Dunaway, Ryan Brown, and Lance Taylor. He's announcing he's coming back to Alabama. Not too shocking. I think most people expected that. Most people expect that, especially with the quarterback draft class you got going on right now with Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, Bo Nix, Michael Penix. That makes sense. Jalen Milroe needs to come prove it for a whole season. He's had a great month of November, or a pretty good month of November. So he's a lot to gain, I think, by coming back next year. From an Arkansas standpoint, going to the portal again, keep an eye on Tennessee corner transfer Danico Slaughter and Georgia linebacker transfer Xavier Sori. Arkansas sees their backs against the wall here, guys. And we got people's back against the wall. They're willing to do anything. And Arkansas's collective, I think Sam Pittman's came and begged them. We got to do whatever we can because he knows his back against the wall. This is a big make or break year, similar to how Billy Napier is in Gainesville. So be on the lookout for Danico Slaughter at corner and Georgia linebacker Xavier Sori at Arkansas. Also, I just saw it right before I got on Press Live. Georgia linebacker Jamon Dumas Johnson expected to hit the portal, was hurt towards the end of the year, didn't play in the SEC championship game against Alabama. I think missed the 2 or 3 games before that. But he's apparently going to hit the portal, so it's a name to keep an eye on. Speaking of Georgia, they're looking for some receivers. Remember, the portal is always going to be deep with wide receivers. There's a lot of them out there. But they're pretty involved with Miami wideout Colby Young. He's going to be on Ole Miss, Georgia's campus this weekend. Young, a big, long, 6'5", 215. Georgia doesn't really have a guy who fits that description right now in the room. Young, 79 catches for 939 yards, 10 tutties over the past 2 seasons in Coral Gables. Would be a big pickup for Georgia. Also keep an eye on a guy, Jerron Glover, another guy, played sparingly at Michigan State. He's in the portal, but those are 2 guys, or really 3. Also one we need to keep an eye on. Sorry about that. One guy we need to keep an eye on is London Humphreys, the Vanderbilt transfer. Actually had a touchdown against Georgia this year in Nashville. He OV'd already. Looks like he's going to be a Bulldog. Be shocked if he's not a Georgia Bulldog. Keep an eye on that. Georgia also showing interest. There's a lot of Georgia transfer portal news. You know what I mean? Malik Murphy, the Texas quarterback, backup quarterback. He's entering the portal. He will not be with Texas during the college football playoff semifinal against Washington in the Sugar Bowl. That's another story right there. That means Arch Manning's backup quarterback if Quinn Ewers was go down. Conversation another day. He's in the portal. Malik's not staying with Texas throughout the bowl game or preparation. Georgia's keeping him on the back burner a little bit. If Carson Beck decides he wants to go test the NFL draft waters, I don't think he will. I think Georgia, the Classic City Collective, and Carson Beck will come to some agreement. He will be back at Georgia next year, the Jacksonville native. I'd be shocked. I don't think he played his best ball in the SEC championship, so I think he can come back and still have a lot to prove. So I like Carson Beck coming back to Georgia, if I'm being honest. I think that would be a smart decision for him, and obviously it'd serve as plenty of value for Georgia to get him back. But Malik Murphy, the name being tossed around, maybe is plan B for Georgia if Beck were to lose or leave. LSU should be getting some good news on Mississippi State wide receiver transfer Xavier Thomas. He went to John Ehret. He's a New Orleans native. Mississippi State's best playmaker at wide receiver. He's already OV'd. Expect that to be announced at some point. He will be going back to his home state to be for LSU. That'll be big news. LSU's losing some receivers, obviously. Malik Neighbors, losing him, Brian Thomas Jr. Some of the best weapons they have will be missing. So LSU's going to need to replace that. As we all know, people are probably like, Dave, LSU's biggest weakness was their secondary on defense. What are we doing? Well, Jair Brown may come in to help. Spent some time in New Orleans. He's an Ohio kid at heart. Went to Ohio State transfer. He could be at LSU. It's a name to keep an eye on right there for LSU. Not a lot of big defensive updates from LSU right now. I expected a little more, but it's the only one I could go scrounge up from talking to people, scouring it from people I trust. Jair Brown, corner from Ohio State, is a guy to keep an eye on. North Carolina defensive lineman Kedrick Bingley-Jones, speaking of Mississippi State, I brought him up with Xavier Thomas. Mississippi State got a commitment on Tuesday from defensive lineman, like I mentioned, from North Carolina, Kedrick Bingley-Jones. Big pickup there from Mississippi State. I hadn't watched this film, but you can never have enough of the big uglies up front. On the hardwood, we were talking football, but I'm staying on Mississippi State here for you Mississippi State fans. Tolu Smith has gotten cleared to participate in full contact practice for the Bullies. That's big for Chris Jans in this team. Looks like he may be back. I don't know. I would say maybe second, third week of SEC play, probably on a minute count. Probably not going to just throw him out there or even start it, but that's big. He'll have his first full contact practice. got it cleared today through x-rays. So that's a positive news for Tolu Smith and for the Mississippi State basketball program. I'm going to throw that out there. Put it back in gear. Let's go back to football. I'm sorry. I just wanted to keep Mississippi State topic with Mississippi State topic there for people. Former Georgia linebacker Darius Smith did not play a lot. Currently on an official visit at Missouri. So keep an eye on that. South Carolina, thought maybe the biggest winners of the portal in the SEC this week, received two massive gets at the running back position. We all know him. Arkansas running back Raheem Rocket Sanders, who had his big coming out party 2 years ago against South Carolina. I believe he's second team All-SEC running back in 22. He committed to South Carolina and Shane Beamer this weekend. Also, North Texas running back Oscar Attaway III. He's coming in. Mario Anderson Jr., remember, he's entering the portal. So he'll be going the Newberry transfer from last year for South Carolina. But I think Attaway's a better version of him, more complete back. Remember, this was a weak spot for South Carolina last year, this running back room. This could be a big strength now. This could be a big strength for this team now. You got to love the addition of Rocket Sanders and Oscar Attaway there. So that will be a good addition. I like that for South Carolina right there. Defensive tackle, looking at Amari Thomas from Tennessee, says he'll be back in Knoxville next year. Again, can never have too many defensive tackles from a depth standpoint. Texas A&M hired former LSU strength and conditioning coach Tommy Moffitt. Tommy Moffitt, been around the block under Nick Saban, Les Miles, Ed Orgeron. Didn't get retained when Brian Kelly brought his assistant guy from Notre Dame. Massive hire here for Texas A&M. Tommy Moffitt, not a non-BS guy. He put up lists for scouts of guys who aren't working hard, aren't showing up to workouts. Hey, don't draft this. Don't draft John Smith. He doesn't show up, or he doesn't finish, or he doesn't compete. He put that outside his office. And for context, these NFL scouts, personnel people, when they come into the building, they're wanting to talk to the strength coach. Because remember, like I said, if you follow me on social media, I stated, if I was a head football coach, the first hire I am making is the strength and conditioning coach. He's with your players more than any position coach, coordinator, GA, support staff member, obviously head coach there is. Some of these guys don't feel as valued after talking to some of these strength coaches. I used to love to chop it up with the strength coaches. They knew so much about the team. Remember, I'm a personnel guy. I like to kind of know what makes some of these guys tick. If you want to find that out, you go talk to the strength coaches. That's why these NFL personnel people, scouts, when they're in these buildings, that's the main person they want to talk to. And they love the strength coaches who are out up front and honest. So strength coach, massive addition here for Texas A&M. Very underrated hire. If you know Tommy Moffitt, you know how big of a deal this is, but big hire for Mike Elko and Texas A&M. Tennessee should be expecting some good news from the portal as well from a tight end standpoint. I expect them to get one of probably either Kentucky's Jordan Dingle, who actually had a big game against Tennessee this past year, and Notre Dame's Holden Stays. One of those, both OVs should announce for Tennessee here soon. And it's still, last update, still sounds like a potential Ole Miss Texas battle for Juice Wells, wide receiver Juice Wells, transfer from South Carolina. Sounds like South Carolina's tried to get back in it. Justin Stepp, the South Carolina wide receiver coach, feels okay about it. Again, Ole Miss, one of the most organized collectives, the Grove Collective, ran by Walker Jones. The Grove Collective and the Auburn Collective, I forget the name of it off the top of my head, they feel like they're the most on the same page with the football program and what they have to do. It just feels that way from talking to people, that they're both on the same page, and that is massive. Think about it from an NFL standpoint. It's like your front office being on the same page with your coaching staff, and it's an easier marriage. I mean, you hear about these front offices that want to make the decision. The head coach or position coach coordinator didn't want to draft that kid. It just doesn't work out because this coach doesn't really want to develop him, didn't really like him in the interview process, thought they could get better. The GM front office wants to make a big splash, sell tickets. The owner, think about the owner with the Carolina Panthers. So, something like that. Like, he's very involved, like trying to make decisions and stuff he's not real nuanced in, I should say. But again, I always brag about the Grove Collective and Auburn's On to Victory. That was the name of their collective. It just came to me. But again, Ole Miss, Texas battle, future SEC team for Juice Wells will be a massive addition for both teams. Just got a text from George Hilo, actually, the Alabama hire we just mentioned, the former Michigan coach. So that's good right there. But let's transition. We had a big announcement yesterday, the 2024 SEC football schedule. We knew the opponents. We just didn't know the dates. The SEC had a 2-hour show. Who was on it? Yeah, Greg McElroy, Tim Tebow, Joey Galloway. I don't know why he was on it, but I guess because the ESPN ABC connection, it's going to be an SEC or ABC ESPN connection, the Disney Channel network. So you never know what time these big games in the SEC are going to be next year. They're going to probably be maybe some doubleheaders at 2:30 then at night. When's the prime time going to be? It's another conversation for another day. Let's get a sip of water in before we move on, though. I'm about to break down all 16 teams' schedule for you here that was announced last night. A lot of great matchups. Then I'm going to go over some, they're not under the radar, but some matchups that have not been talked about enough. But lead off, we're going alphabetically. The Alabama Crimson Tide schedule 2024 opening up with Western Kentucky. Then USF returns the trip to Tuscaloosa. Alabama non-conference heads to Wisconsin. Should be a big one. Georgia and Alabama, we've only seen them play 5, maybe 6 times in the regular season in the last 20 years. That'll be a big one. Alabama at Vanderbilt. South Carolina at Alabama. Alabama heads to Knoxville to play Tennessee. Missouri at Alabama. Interesting matchup there. Alabama at LSU. Mercer at Alabama. Alabama at Oklahoma, and Auburn at Alabama. So that is, I don't think they're all tough. Like I get texts from buddies all the time. Be like, God, we got a murderer's row of schedules. Everybody kind of has a murderer's row of schedule, for being honest right now. I mean, we're adding Oklahoma and Texas into the league, guys. Everybody's going to play some tougher matchups. The SEC did a good job of getting their blue blood programs playing each other. But I think for what it is, this is a very manageable schedule for Alabama. I think they got their first 3 weeks, then a bye week to get it figured out before Georgia comes to town. You got Vanderbilt right after that, South Carolina after that. That's 2 games Alabama should win. Alabama's going to be a preseason top 5 team next year, especially when Jalen Milroe announced that he's coming back. At Tennessee, it's going to be a tough one. This is an interesting matchup. We'll talk about it. I'll just go ahead and tell you, this is one of the more underrated games, in my opinion. Missouri at Alabama. I think Missouri's going to be good again next year. This is an interesting matchup. It hadn't been talked about. Then a bye week. Then the obvious matchup, early November, Alabama at LSU. Alabama heading to Tiger Stadium. Alabama will get Mercer at home before 2 big games in the year. Another under the radar. Shouldn't say under the radar. People talk about this, but Alabama at Oklahoma. You got to love both the colors there. This crimson and white versus crimson and cream in Norman. That'll be a good matchup. And then Auburn comes to Bryant-Denny Stadium for the Iron Bowl. With adding Oklahoma and Texas in, again, Alabama's not playing Texas here because they played them the last 2 years. It's a manageable schedule, in my opinion. It's as manageable as it could get. Very winnable road non-conference game at Wisconsin. Granted, Luke Fickell and the Wisconsin team in their second year should be better. You got a bye week to get ready for Georgia. You get your typical bye week for LSU. You get Auburn at home. At Tennessee is going to be tough. Missouri. This is manageable if you're an Alabama-type team. I don't think this is that it's difficult as some are going to make it out to be. I don't really hate that schedule. Moving to Arkansas, the Razorbacks open up with Arkansas Pine Bluff. Then they head to Stillwater to face Oklahoma State. UAB comes to Fayetteville. Arkansas goes at Auburn. Arkansas plays Texas A&M in Arlington as they usually do. Then Tennessee, they'll head to Arkansas. It's a game we don't normally see. LSU at Arkansas. Arkansas at Mississippi State. Ole Miss at Arkansas. Texas heads to Arkansas, where they played in 2021 in Fayetteville. Sarkisian's first year. La Tech, second to last week, heads to Arkansas, and then Arkansas at Missouri to end the year. Arkansas usually gets the short end of the stick, I feel like, in all sports. I mean, basketball, it's scheduled for another topic for another day. They had a tough schedule this past year. They were away from home for 5 straight weeks for about a month. Arkansas could have got hurt a little worse. I don't think this is awful. It's an awful schedule. I mean, you expected them to play Texas. Tennessee coming to Fayetteville, it'd be an interesting matchup. I mean, their big tough stretch here is going to be at Auburn, A&M in Arlington, Tennessee, bye week, LSU. That'll be a tough 4 or 5 weeks if you're including the bye week. Yeah, I'd probably say it's their toughest stretch. Sam Pittman's going to have to get to 6 or 7. Going to have to get to bowl eligibility. You see by the way they're operating out of the portal. But again, I don't think this is some daunting schedule either. They're all going to be daunting. It's almost like you're getting bit by a poisonous snake. Weird analogy here. It just came to me. Pick your poison a little bit. You're going to face some poisonous snakes along the way. Which one do you want to face? Which one do you want to get bitten by? The moccasin, the copperhead, the rattlesnake, the mamba, the black mamba. I mean, tell me which snake you want to get bit by. I mean, that's essentially what it is when we're comparing this. So this is it's nothing new. I mean, I don't think this is some overly bearing schedule for Arkansas. Like, yeah, it's tough. They're not going to be favored in a lot of these games, but some of them are winnable. Nothing daunting. Let's move to the next team, Auburn. Remember, this is an alphabetical. Get to the A's right here. Auburn's one's interesting. They don't leave the state. They don't leave their first all 5 games are at home. I mean, so they open up with Alabama A&M at home, Cal returns the trip to Auburn. Remember, Auburn went out there this past year. New Mexico at Auburn. Arkansas at Auburn. Oklahoma heading to Auburn. Another one of those interesting matchups. Auburn at Georgia. We're used to that. Auburn at Missouri. Interesting one. Auburn at Kentucky. Vanderbilt at Auburn. Louisiana Monroe at Auburn. Texas A&M at Auburn. Then Auburn heads to Bryant-Denny for the Iron Bowl. The thing you notice with Auburn's schedule. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Like I just mentioned. 5 straight weeks at home. And then they go 3 straight weeks on the road, 3 straight weeks at home, and then on the road to Alabama. So we're at home for 5 straight weeks, on the road for 4 straight weeks if you count a bye week, or away from home for 4 straight weeks if you count the bye week. Then we're at home for 3 straight weeks, including a bye week, and then Alabama. Weird schedule there. That's the first one that kind of stood out to me there a little bit of like, it's an interesting schedule there. But again, not tough. Cal, it's a game Auburn should win. Arkansas at Auburn. I think Auburn's going to be improved. That Oklahoma game on September 28th could be one to really circle. That could be one to really circle, especially as we move on to Oklahoma here in a bit. That one, Auburn should be undefeated going into that one. They should be 4-0, getting ready to host Oklahoma for a massive one before they go on the road to Georgia the next week. And they get a bye week. So it's a tough schedule. I think this is one of the – this is a tough schedule to me. I mean, it is. You just don't know how good Texas A&M is going to be. Losing so many guys in the portal, it's so tough to replace. But an interesting just development schedule. Home, away, home, away. Just a weird setup of schedule there. Moving to our first SEC East team, the Florida Gators, and what is probably arguably the toughest schedule of anybody I've seen when you factor in the non-conference games as well. Open up with Miami. It'll be one of the better games of the first weekend. Miami at Florida. Mario Cristobal, Billy Napier, both needing wins here to feel good about. They both needing wins here. It's a big one. Then the boys from Birmingham, Sanford Bulldogs, head to Florida. Then we're open up conference play. Texas A&M at Florida. That'll be a big game for both Mike Elko and Billy Napier too. Starting conference play. You always want to start off 1-0 in conference play. A&M, they open up with Notre Dame. They'll be tested. You know what you're getting with that A&M roster at that point. Florida, you'll know what they'll have at that point. They open up with Miami. Then Florida heads to the Magnolia State at Mississippi State before another non-conference matchup against a tough Big 12 opponent, Gus Malzahn and the boys. UCF heads to Gainesville. Last time they met was 2 years ago in the Gasparilla Bowl. UCF put it on them. I was at UCF then. Florida heading to Knoxville. It's a little later this year, October 12th. That's usually a September game. So that's a notable change. Then Kentucky at Florida. Florida versus Georgia and Jacksonville as we're used to. Florida fans, will they still be interested in the season at this point to make the trip to Austin? It's later in the year, November 9th. What would the record be at that point? That should be a blast if you're a Florida fan. That's a fun trip to the ATX. Be interested to see what they're doing at that point. LSU returns the trip to Florida. Ole Miss at Florida. Florida at Florida State. The thing that stands out to me is what a grind this is from the Georgia game for Florida to the Florida State game. You go Florida versus Georgia and Jacksonville, at Texas, you host LSU, you host Ole Miss, who's probably going to be a preseason at least top 10 team, and then you go at Florida State. That is a lot. That's tough. That is tough. That is tough as a schedule you can get. Oh, and they play Miami and UCF at a conference. I mean, think of the 3 non-cons. I just said they play the whole state. They play the whole state. Miami, UCF, Florida State. You play all 3 Power 5 teams in your state next year. That's a tough schedule. That's the toughest schedule in the league. Has to be. And like I said, the other thing that stands out, the Tennessee game is later in the year. It's usually in September, week 4 normally. It has been recent. It's October 12th this year. I mean, I don't see a guaranteed win on Florida's schedule except Sanford. Not saying they couldn't beat Texas A&M, who's getting depleted through the transfer portal, or beat Mississippi State, or UCF, or Kentucky at home. Not saying that. Man, that is tough. That is tough because drawing Ole Miss next year is gonna be hell. It's gonna be a pain in the ass to play next year. This is as hard as it gets. You heard me about Alabama, Arkansas. I was kind of like, Alabama for Alabama. Is this as bad as it could be? It's like I said, picking what poisonous snake do you want to get bit by when it comes to the 2024 SEC football schedule, especially when you add teams like Oklahoma and Texas. We're not adding BYU here, guys. Just pick your poison. Pick your sentence if you're going to prison. You're going to jail. How long you want to be here? Stuff like that. This is the hardest schedule by far in the conference. The Georgia Bulldogs staying in the East here. They got a harder schedule than they had this year. Granted, I think the schedule this year ended up being more difficult when you factor in how good Missouri and Ole Miss were. So to give Georgia the benefit of the doubt, they got a lot of hell all offseason about how easy the schedule is. Remember, they were supposed to play Oklahoma. The SEC made them reschedule it. Not reschedule it. They knew they'd play in everything. They'll probably play next year. But ended up being tougher because Missouri and Ole Miss were better. This year, all offseason, we talked about this is a tough schedule. Open up with Clemson and Atlanta. Tennessee Tech comes to Athens. Georgia heads on the road for their first true road game at Kentucky, then at Alabama. Looks like Alabama and Georgia both have a bye week before that. Then Auburn comes to town for Georgia on October 5th. Mississippi State battle the Bulldogs on October 12th in Athens. Georgia heads to Austin, and that is not even the biggest event of the year. If you follow SEC football, you probably heard this. They got a massive Formula One race event in Austin that weekend. You have Prince, whatever, I forget what the guy married to Meghan Markle. I forget Prince Henry. My wife's watching probably The Crown downstairs right now. She could probably tell me. I forget. They have people all over the world. It's a massive sport. The Formula One, F1 racing. They have a big event in Austin that week. So Georgia, Texas may not even be that big of the biggest event in town. So if you're a Georgia fan listening, go book your flights. Go get your hotel rooms right now for that week on October 19th. That should be another fun one. I mentioned Florida fans going to Austin this year. Depending what their record be, Georgia will be fine at this point. There'll be a ton of Georgia fans October 19th in Austin. And then Florida at Georgia in Jacksonville, as we're used to. Georgia returns the trip to Ole Miss. Will be interesting. Tennessee comes to Athens. Get at UMass before playing Georgia Tech to wrap up the year. Much tougher schedule heading into the season than it was heading into this past season. So that's where we'll stand from that standpoint. Manageable for a team like Georgia, but again, tougher heading into the season, it looks like. Could end up being weaker because, like I said, schedule ended up being tougher than we thought this past season. Heading to the next one, 2020, the Kentucky schedule, 2024 Kentucky Wildcat schedule. Southern Miss opens up at Kentucky on August 31st. South Carolina at Kentucky. It's an early must-win for both those teams, honestly, in my opinion. Georgia at Kentucky. Ohio at Kentucky. Kentucky heads back to Ole Miss after heading to Oxford 2 years ago in that classic game with Will Levis. Vanderbilt heads to town on October 12th. Kentucky heads to Gainesville to face the Florida Gators on the 19th of October. Auburn, who usually doesn't play Kentucky a whole lot, heads to the Bluegrass State on October 26th. Kentucky at Tennessee on November 2nd. Murray State at Kentucky on November 16th. Kentucky at Texas. They head to the ATX, which I bet there'll be a lot of Big Blue Nation. I bet Kentucky travels. I bet a lot of these teams that are going to Oklahoma, and especially Texas this year, I think they're going to travel well. Same with Texas and Oklahoma fans to other SEC teams. And then they wrap up the season with Louisville playing at Kroger Field on November 30th. Manageable schedule for Kentucky, about as manageable as you could hope for. Nothing as daunting as the Florida schedule, which most aren't. But yeah, I can see Kentucky doing their normal 6-7 wins here. Winnable schedule, but you also have some games you could lose. LSU heading back to the West. Hell, how about LSU playing both USC and UCLA next year? But they open up with USC in Vegas, September 1st. That's the Sunday night, I think. That's the Sunday night. Then they get Nicholls State at home. Then they go at South Carolina. Then they get the UCLA return trip from the 2021 season, Edwards Rons last year. So, again, playing both new Big Ten teams in USC and UCLA. South Alabama, solid program under Kane Womack, heading to Baton Rouge on September 28th. Ole Miss, middle of the season is normal, heading to Baton Rouge in the Battle of the Magnolia Bowl, October 12th. LSU at Arkansas on the 19th of October. LSU will head to Kyle Field earlier than normal. That's no longer the last game of the year, so check that if you're following along at home. That's normally the last game of the year, but it's no longer it. Then LSU will have its typical – excuse me, I had to have a sip of water. Typical bye week before Alabama coming to town. LSU goes at Florida. That game's been moved towards the back of the year. Vanderbilt at LSU, and then wrap up the season. Oklahoma heading to Baton Rouge, which I think will be a fun game. This is a tough schedule. This is another tough schedule for LSU because your two non-conference games are so tough. That's what makes these schedules so daunting. Ole Miss is going to be good. A&M's got some talent. Alabama's going to be good. At Florida's never easy. In Oklahoma, LSU's got to replace a quarterback, some receivers. The defense has to get better. LSU's got some question marks, and this is maybe not the schedule you want to be starting it off in. I'm really interested in that first game. There's a lot on the line there. Lincoln Riley kind of testing his manhood. Are they man enough to go win big games? So far, no, not at USC. But in their backyard in Vegas, LSU coming to town, They can prove it. Hey, we can beat an SEC team. LSU in their hand, having to replace a lot. They got to get better on defense. Matt House still can't have that poor defense. Brian Kelly's going to keep him, it looks like. There's a lot of questions we're going to get answered that first week in Vegas. Fired up for that one. But again, interesting. USC and UCLA. When's the last time a team has played both those teams, both LA teams from the former Pac-12 Big Ten? That's an interesting one, though. Speaking of Ole Miss, I've been high on the Rebels all episode, hadn't I? I've been high on the Rebels all episode. Opening up with Furman, the Paladins at home. Middle Tennessee State comes to town, and then Ole Miss goes to Wake Forest, stopping you there. Again, now, this is Georgia Southern at Ole Miss. Ole Miss should start off 4-0. They really should. Ole Miss, see, this is where Ole Miss is different than – it's not their fault. Georgia, LSU, and Florida, they're at a conference is not difficult next year. The hardest game is probably at Wake Forest and Winston-Salem. It's winnable. But Ole Miss should really start 6-0. That trip at LSU will be the first real challenge, I think. That's crazy to say about it, Ole Miss, but that's how well they're doing through the portal right now. Especially if they had those three guys like I mentioned, Walter Nolan, Princely Malayan, the edge defender from Florida, who is their best probably defender, highest upside from an NFL standpoint. And then you add Tyler Barron, one of the better edge defenders for Tennessee this past year. They're battling Bama for him. But again, I see 6-0 right here for Ole Miss. I think this is one of the easier schedules for one of the better teams in the league. They should beat Furman, Middle Tennessee State, Wake, Georgia Southern, and Kentucky, and South Carolina. Then you go LSU, then you get Oklahoma. You go at Arkansas. Georgia returns the trip like we mentioned earlier. At Florida and then Mississippi State. Ole Miss, again, I think should easily win 9 games, at least. I think this is a very manageable schedule for how good of a team Ole Miss can be. They got a big schedule break here. Remember, they don't play Alabama or Auburn or Texas A&M. This is one of the more manageable schedules. This is why I like Ole Miss as we stand right now on December 14th. Heading to their in-state rival across the state. Mississippi State opening up with Eastern Kentucky on August 31st. Mississippi State goes at Arizona State. I've heard a lot of buddies are making the trip to Tempe and making a golf trip. Maybe you'll see a Cardinals Diamondbacks game. So that'd be a fun trip for Mississippi State fans in Phoenix. Toledo heads to Starkville the next week. Florida heads to Starkville. Mississippi State fans, they're just like the Kentucky, Florida, Georgia fans. They get a chance to go to Austin. That'll be a fun trip. Mississippi State at Georgia. Texas A&M goes to Mississippi State. Arkansas at Mississippi State. UMass at Mississippi State. Mississippi State heads to Knoxville to play Tennessee. Missouri invades Starkville, and then Mississippi State makes the return trip on the Egg Bowl. Right now, it doesn't look like the Egg Bowl is going to be on a Saturday, but I saw Greg McElroy mention there's some window they could maybe get on that Thursday slate. Because remember, people were like, why is the Egg Bowl or the Texas A&M game not on Thursday night? That was a massive deal. I agree. They should put one of those games on there. But at this moment, they haven't. But that's Mississippi State's schedule. I think this is fine because, again, I think they should win all their non-conference games between Eastern Kentucky, Arizona State, and Toledo. I think those are all winnable. I don't really think they don't play Alabama or Auburn. They do draw Georgia and Texas. At Tennessee is going to be tough. Missouri is going to be good. It's a tough schedule. It's going to be a tough test for Jeff Levy in his first year. But I think they got to do well in non-conference. They got to win those games. They got to get. It's a big. Always at Mississippi State, you got to do well non-conference wise. You always got to do well non-conference wise, and I think they'll have an opportunity next year. Moving to the next team, the Missouri Tigers, coming off their 10-2 win, open up with Murray State. Then Buffalo comes to town. Boston College, their big out-of-conference matchup. Vanderbilt comes to Columbia. Then Missouri goes to College Station, faces their old Big 12 brethren. I think that's one of the underrated games in the league. That'll be a fun matchup, old Big 12 battle. Missouri goes to UMass. Interesting game, Chestnut Hill. Didn't realize that game was in UMass, so I was just looking at it. Auburn at Missouri. Missouri at Alabama, another interesting one. Oklahoma, old Big 12 brother in there. I mean, it looks like they're getting it all together, the band back together with their Big 12 brothers, except the Texas matchup. Then Missouri at South Carolina, Missouri at Mississippi State, and then Arkansas to end the year. Be interesting to see if they keep that on Friday night as well, after Thanksgiving. I think this is a manageable schedule for Missouri. And they should win all their non-conference games. Murray State, Buffalo, Boston College should beat Vandy. A&M, there was a year to get them at Caulfield. I think it's next year. It should get UMass. Auburn, a winnable game at home for Missouri. And Alabama's going to be tough, but could be sneaky. Oklahoma, tough. At South Carolina, they always beat South Carolina. Beamer's got to get that monkey off his back. At Mississippi State. Again, I think this is another anywhere 7-9 win, 8-9 win season for Missouri and Eli Drinkwitz with the guys he's got back with Brady Cook and Luther Burden. Again, I think this schedule, Missouri and Ole Miss, out of the teams from a ceiling standpoint in the break they got in their schedule, especially conference and non-conference wise, have the biggest benefit, I think. I think those are the two winners so far, in my opinion. Moving to the new kid on the block, the Oklahoma Sooners will open up, host Temple at home. Houston heads to Norman the next week. I feel like Oklahoma's always playing Tulane. Tulane goes to Oklahoma, it feels like, for the third time in 4 years. I think it's really the second time in 4 years. Tennessee at Oklahoma, the Josh Heupel Bowl. That's a big one. Josh Heupel, former quarterback at Oklahoma, won a national championship there. Was the OC there. His old coach fired him, Bob Stoops. There's some bad blood there. People think if he keeps having success at Tennessee, maybe Brent Venables doesn't. They hire him. I've heard that's not as likely as you think. Apparently, it's bad blood right now. Oklahoma heads to Auburn. I think that's a massive one because I think Auburn and Oklahoma fans are going to find out if Auburn's good. And I think Auburn's going to be better next year. When they're good and they get a big opponent at home, Jordan-Hare is the toughest place to play in the SEC. That or Neyland Stadium. Texas at Oklahoma and Dallas in the Cotton Bowl. It'll be the SEC's first taste of the Red River rivalry. South Carolina at Oklahoma. Shane Beamer goes against his old team. Oklahoma at Ole Miss. They're heading to Oxford. That'll be a madhouse that weekend in Oxford. Maine at Oklahoma. Oklahoma heads to Missouri. Alabama at Oklahoma. Oklahoma at LSU. This is a hard schedule. It's a hard schedule, in my opinion. Temple should be a win. Houston's no slouch. Tulane's no slouch. Tennessee's tough. At Auburn's going to be tough. Texas is always tough. South Carolina at home, it's a winnable game. At Ole Miss, going to be tough. Maine, they should win. At Missouri, going to be tough. Alabama at home, going to be tough. At LSU, going to be tough. Welcome to the SEC, Oklahoma and Brent Venables. This is up there with the Florida one, in my opinion. Remember, I keep putting them in different hats here. I got my Ole Miss, Missouri hat here, are going to be two really good teams next year. I think they got some schedule breaks when you factor in their non-conference schedule next year. And I think next year you got Florida and Oklahoma. And probably Georgia sitting in here like, woo! Welcome to the 2024, the new era of the SEC, boys. Lock the gates and let's go is essentially what the SEC just said. Some people are like, well, Alabama's, they play Oklahoma and Georgia. I think for who Alabama's going to be next year, it's very manageable. It's very manageable. Remember, you got to factor in who they play non-conference well. I mean, look at Florida, UCF, Miami, and Florida State. Alabama plays Wisconsin. On the road, granted, at Camp Randall. I think it's a winnable game for Alabama, especially with Alabama will have next year. Oklahoma's got two tough non-conference matchups against Houston and Tulane. Big 12 opponent, one of the better group of five programs out there. I think this is up there with that same tough schedule as Florida and Georgia. Moving to South Carolina, open up with Old Dominion, the Monarchs, then head to Lexington to place Kentucky to open up conference play. LSU comes to town. Akron comes to town the next week. Ole Miss comes to Columbia. South Carolina heads to Tuscaloosa. That's a game nobody's really thinking about. It's a tough break right there. South Carolina at Oklahoma. A&M at South Carolina. They're going to keep that. Remember, those were the two SEC West, SEC East common opponents randomly enough, even though they're the two farthest away teams in the conference. South Carolina goes to Music City, plays Vandy. Missouri at South Carolina. Wofford, in-state team, the Terriers against South Carolina. And then, obviously, the Clemson game to wrap up. I don't think this is terrible, but getting Oklahoma, LSU, and Alabama is a tough draw. I'll say that. It's a pretty difficult schedule. Not as tough as Florida's, Oklahoma's, or Georgia's, but it's difficult. And a big must-have year for Shane Beamer. I think you got to get 7. Got to at least go to a bowl. And then I think 25 is going to be real. 25 is going to be, we need 8 or 9, Shane. I think that's what it is. I think if you're a South Carolina fan right now, you're just hoping to get to a bowl game. And I mean, let's look at it. Old Dominion should be a win. Akron 2. Vandy 3. Wofford 4. They got to get 2 more and can't drop any this one. I think they got 4. I see 4. You got to get 2 more. But who does that come against? Kentucky? If they get LSU early when LSU's still getting some wrinkles out, I don't think they're going to beat Ole Miss. They're not going to beat Alabama. They're not going to go win in Norman. A&M, maybe, depending on what they're doing. They're losing a lot from the portal. I don't care who you are. That's tough to replace that much talent. Missouri's going to be tough. They never win that game. And then Clemson, it'll be tough, but they need to get to 6 for Shane Beamer. That'll be key for him next year. The Tennessee Vols open up with UT Chattanooga, old Mach top coming to Tennessee. NC State, that's a big one. Second week of the season. It says week 1, but it's the second week of the season in Charlotte. Kent State heading to Knoxville. Then Tennessee, we mentioned it, Josh Heupel return trip to Oklahoma to face the Sooners. Then they head to the Ozarks, play Arkansas on the road. Florida at Tennessee. It's one of the matchups pushed back later here. The common opponents or the common matchups that are going to be different for sure are going to be Florida at Tennessee's later and Texas A&M, LSU's earlier. Just keep in mind of that. Alabama at Tennessee, Kentucky at Tennessee, Mississippi State at Tennessee, Tennessee at Georgia, UTEP at Tennessee, Tennessee at Vanderbilt. I think this is a manageable schedule for Tennessee because I think they need to win that NC State game. It's a big tone setter for obviously NC State too. NC State a big year coming up for Dave Doran and them. So that'll be a big game, that second game for both teams of NC State, Tennessee. But I mean, it's doable for Tennessee. At Oklahoma will be tough. At Arkansas is winnable. Florida, very winnable. Alabama, winnable at home. That'll be tough, though. Kentucky, Tennessee always beats Kentucky. Doesn't mean they can't. Kentucky can't. Mississippi State's winnable. At Georgia will be tough. UTEP should be winnable. But I think Tennessee's got a relatively easy draw. Again, it always goes back to your non-conference matchup. Can they get that done? But again, I think it's a very favorable draw for Josh Heupel heading into his third season. The Texas Longhorns, the other new kid on the block, opening up Colorado State at Texas. Texas at Michigan. That's the big non-conference matchup, I think, in the SEC next year. It's crazy to say in the SEC. Texas at Michigan. Better get locked in. Get your mind focused. That could be the national championship this year. They could play twice within their last 3 games if Texas beats Washington and Michigan beats Alabama. They play twice in their last 3 games. In Houston for the national championship, and then week 1, September 7th, in Ann Arbor at the Big House. UTSA at Texas, Louisiana Monroe at Texas, Mississippi State at Texas, Texas at Oklahoma in Dallas, Georgia at Texas, Texas at Vanderbilt. That'll be an interesting game for Texas fans to go to. One of the more unique cities in the SEC, a bigger city, unlike the other college towns. Florida at Texas, Texas at Arkansas, Kentucky at Texas, and Texas at Texas A&M. It's a tough schedule. Welcome to the SEC because, again, look who they play out of conference. Michigan. It's tough. At Michigan at the Big House. Mississippi State, solid draw for them. Oklahoma is. It's always going to be a tough game, Red River rivalry. Georgia's a tough draw. They do get Vandy. Florida, I think, very winnable for Texas at home. At Arkansas, very winnable for Texas at home. Granted, it'll be really cold in the Ozarks that time of year, but Texas is used to going to places like Manhattan, Kansas, Iowa State. They're used to do it. I saw someone mention that. It's like, well, I mean, they go play Big 12 teams in the cold in the middle of November as well. Kentucky, it's a manageable schedule for Texas A&M. I mean, for Texas, it really is. I think opening for what you thought they may throw you into that gauntlet of a fire if you're Texas or Oklahoma, specifically Texas, this is doable, especially when you factor in you go to Michigan week 1 or week 2. So I think it's a doable schedule for Texas. Going about an hour and a half over to College Station, Notre Dame at Texas A&M. I like both Texas schools here playing big non-conference matchups. Again, Michigan, Texas, and you got Notre Dame at Texas A&M. McNeese State at Texas A&M, you see there. Texas A&M heads to Florida. Bowling Green comes to town. Play Arkansas and Arlington. Missouri at Texas A&M. Texas A&M at Mississippi State. LSU at Texas A&M. Remember that game's earlier. It's usually the last game of the year. Texas A&M at South Carolina. New Mexico State at Texas A&M. Texas A&M at Auburn. And Texas at Texas A&M. Difficult schedule, I think. Difficult schedule. Got to think. Notre Dame, tough game. At Florida early with a new staff, you're breaking that in. That's a tough road trip, first SEC game. Arkansas game's always tough. Missouri, again, I think they're going to be good next year. It's going to be another good Elijah Drinkwitz team. That's a tough matchup. Mississippi State should be winnable. LSU's going to be tough. At Auburn and then Texas. I think those 2 last games of the year will be tough. That'll be interesting for Mike Elko. How do they finish? They're going to need to get one of those. But the more I look at it, it's manageable again, kind of like Texas's. Because, again, you're playing a big non-conference matchup with a team like Notre Dame coming to Kyle Field. That's going to be awesome. I mean, Texas A&M has 2 fantastic matchups at home this year. If you're a Texas A&M season ticket holder, you are jacked. You get to see Notre Dame and Texas at home. Then add in LSU. Who else am I missing? Missouri. Yeah, that's a pretty good home schedule if you're a Texas A&M Aggie. But again, a manageable schedule there. And then finally, the Vanderbilt Commodores open up with Virginia Tech. Alcorn State comes to town. They go to Georgia State to play at Turner Field. That's an interesting matchup in Atlanta. Vanderbilt at Missouri. Alabama comes to Nashville. Vanderbilt at Kentucky. Ball State comes to town. Texas comes to Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt at Auburn. South Carolina at Vanderbilt. Vandy heads to Baton Rouge to face LSU, and then they wrap up the season as they normally do against their in-state rival Tennessee, which will probably be a Tennessee home game then, as we all know. I mean, it's Vanderbilt, guys. Ain't nothing against Vanderbilt if you're a Vanderbilt fan. Listen to it. Every year is a gauntlet. You're just hoping to get to 6. I don't know if I see 6, though. Maybe 1, maybe 2. Georgia State. I'll be honest with you. I don't know what Georgia State really has coming back next year. Ball State, 3. I mean, again, I was the one that took the Vanderbilt over-under, bet the mortgage 3.5 this year, the Vegas over-under win total. Didn't hit it. So who knows with Vanderbilt? But again, it's only going to get more difficult when you add Oklahoma and Texas in. So this schedule is what it is. It's always going to be difficult for Vanderbilt. But we're going through all 16 matchups there, guys. All 16 games, all 16 teams' schedules in the SEC, adding Texas and Oklahoma. Some under the radar games I mentioned, just going back to them. Real intrigued, Missouri at Alabama on October 26th. That'll be a fun matchup. Alabama at Oklahoma late in the year, November 23rd. I think that's awesome. Texas A&M at Florida, SEC opener for both teams, September 14th in the Swamp. Georgia at Ole Miss, returning that trip from this year. Ole Miss going to Athens. That's November 9th, late in the year. Oklahoma at Ole Miss. Ole Miss has two really good home games this year. On October 26th, that'll be a fun matchup for Oklahoma fans. Come to Oxford, to the Grove, place they've never been before. Missouri at Texas A&M, I mentioned it. The old fellow Big 12 brethren coming back on October 5th. Oklahoma at Auburn. I feel like that game's not talked about enough. That'll be fun early in the season. I think Auburn will be undefeated rolling into that game. September 28th, Jordan-Hare, hard as hell to play at. Oklahoma will learn. Tennessee at Oklahoma, the Josh Heupel Bowl. Former player, former OC, got fired by Bob Stoops, his coach. And then maybe at Texas at Vandy. I just think it could be a fun trip for Texas fans. It's the most unique city in the SEC, really, because it's not a college town. It's Nashville. But that game's on October 26th. So that's a wrap from the 2024 SEC schedule review. Covered a lot from that standpoint. A lot of exciting matchups. I don't have to tell you. I just talked about some of the under-the-radar matchups I was fired about. But, man, 2024 football season can't get here soon enough. But, again, we got a lot of other stuff to cover. But, man, the SEC did a good job revealing that. Just waiting on some times now. Remember, no longer 2:30 CBS is going to be the big game. You could see a lot more ABC, ESPN doubleheaders, with 2:30 being a prime spot, but also the bigger game with Fowler and Herbstreit, Chris Fowler and Herbstreit being that night game. But transitioning over now, in case you missed it, the NCAA ruling college athletes who were denied the chance to play immediately after transferring a second time can return to competition for now after a federal judge in West Virginia issued a 14-day temporary restraining order Wednesday against the NCAA. U.S. District Judge John Preston Bailey in northern West Virginia issued the order against the NCAA from enforcing the transfer rule. A lawsuit, I'm reading here, as you can tell, filed by West Virginia and 6 other states alleged the rules waiver process violated federal antitrust law. That's what all this boils down to. The order clears the way for athletes to play during the 2-week period and also ensures that schools won't be punished for allowing it. The NCAA said in a statement it would comply with order and notify schools. The ruling comes while the transfer window is open for football and creates an opportunity for players who have already transferred using their so-called one-time transfer for immediate eligibility to enter the portal again and be cleared to compete for next season. In layman's terms, if you're a college basketball fan or an Ole Miss LSU basketball fan, you're fired up. Guys like Brandon Murray, the LSU Georgetown transfer, he's cleared. Brandon Murray, Jalen Cook, the Tulane transfer, he can go play in this 2-week period. Now the NCAA is kind of like, don't look at us, though. I mean, is it a whole year of eligibility if they play within this 14-day window when we come back and vote on this or determine on December 27th if we want to extend this 2-week restraining order? I don't know. I mean, going from a football standpoint, you remember Tez Walker, the North Carolina wide receiver who got cleared in the middle of the year. This kind of is in that wheelhouse as well. I mean, from a football transfer portal standpoint, all these kids, if this restraining order gets extended past December 27th and goes through the transfer portal, could all, even if you transferred already, a guy like, who am I thinking about? A guy like, for Alabama, I don't know why his name, Trey Amos, could go enter the portal again and be eligible immediately after he'd already transferred from ULL. Who else am I missing? Jackson Dart could immediately go be eligible again without having to sit out a year. Who else am I thinking about off the top of my head here? You could have Graham Mertz could go transfer again if he wanted to without sitting out. You are opening up a window for free agency every year. No other sport in the world, or really even businesses or organization, do that. That is totally asinine. Now, I'm all for change. I really am. You got to be able to adapt or die. And I'm not ready to say this is going to be bad for college athletics. I lean towards it probably will be. But again, I think it all comes down to how the fans react to this. And when I was asking buddies today, okay, if it was free agency every year, your favorite players could transfer 4 or 5 times in college as much as they want every year on a different team, would you still watch? Unanimously, everybody said yes. but I probably wouldn't give money like I used to. I think that would be 95% of fans. And unless fans are not turning on the television anymore to watch college football, they don't care. In college football, people make, oh, it's over. College football, college athletics over. As a television markets and viewership says otherwise. College football is as strong as it's ever been. So until that changes, nothing really matters from this standpoint. But do they care? Ultimately, what do the fans want is ultimately going to determine this. But a lot of it's an antitrust thing. I mean, people are like, oh, we got to look out for the student athletes. If the coaches can move around every year without penalty, so should the players. Well, the coaches do have a penalty. It's called a buyout. You just don't hear it. You don't understand it because it's not in a contract. You don't see it. And most of the time, the school that's hiring them away is paying that out too. So it's personally for the coach, it's not a penalty, but it would be if that school hired him, which is like, we're not paying that. You got to pay for that if you want to leave. I mean, what about the development of the student athlete? I mean, if we were transferring every year, that's not good for the sport. Not good for the sport. It's really not. I'll still watch college football every week, of course, all college athletics. And this just isn't a college football thing, so I need to stay corrected. But imagine you being able to lead every single year. That's the road we're on. If they extend this restraining order through December 27th, like they mentioned could happen yesterday. This all started with a West Virginia basketball player needing immediate eligibility, coming over from I forget what school over there. But this is a West Virginia judge up in northern West Virginia who's a big West Virginia fan who's trying to get reelected. This is what this all comes down to. Is this really what we want college athletics to be? Is this really what we want it to be, where it's just a free agency chaos every year? And that's probably the best way to say it. It's going to be chaos. I don't necessarily want to say it's going to be bad, because I still think people are going to tune in. It's just going to be a ton of chaos. I think you're going to see more coaches start heading towards the NFL, or some people getting out in the support staff standpoint that the money isn't compensated for the time they're putting in. So we're going to keep talking about this, because remember, this restraining order comes out December 27th. So around Christmas on that week, it's my episode that week. We got to look. So that Thursday on December 28th, I'll give you an update. And if this gets extended for another couple of weeks through the NCAA transfer portal, it's already affecting college basketball. So these college basketball coaches right now are having to talk. Hey, do I go play Brandon Murray if I'm Chris Beard? Do I go play Jalen Cook if I'm Matt McMahon at LSU? They said it's going to count against their eligibility, and I saw Jeff Goodman, who does a fantastic job covering college basketball for the Phone 68, say, what do coaches do? You play them. The NCAA has no bite left anymore. It's a toothless organization. They can't do anything. I mean, they bow down to this restraining order. It's just at the end of the day, as a fan, just question, is this really what you want it to be, a free agency every year? Don't mind if you're going to watch. You're still going to turn on your Mississippi State, Ole Miss, LSU, Alabama, Texas, Oklahoma, name all the SEC schools. But do you really want free agency, that much chaos every year? What about some development? Maybe it's just me working in it. I don't think this is as beneficial, like I mentioned last episode. I don't think this is beneficial to the athlete as people who've never worked in college athletics and some of the national media think. For whatever reason, they think these college athletics departments are an endless money pit and money trees grow on these campuses. All these athletic departments work in the red. If these were normal businesses, they would have declared for bankruptcy 2 decades ago. That kills me. It's a little off topic, but they're like, share revenue with the athletes. Okay, that's fine. Then we'll just play 3 sports, football, basketball, and baseball in some schools, because all the women's sports are going to be gone. Men's golf, men's soccer, water polo, all those sports will be gone because they're not going to fund it because they don't produce revenue. That's another issue for another time. But from this standpoint, this is going to hurt the development of the student athlete if every time they face adversity, they're running away and they don't develop. Just saying, there's no other sport organization in the world it doesn't have contracts or non-compete clauses. It's just ridiculous. Circle on your calendar right after Christmas, December 27th. Big day. It's a big day. Just going to say that. Talked a little bit about college basketball. Mentioned Brandon Murray, Chris Beard, Jalen Cook, Matt McMahon. But let's get to it. Some college basketball. Just going to review it here for you. Just a little bit. Let's share the screen. The week that wasn't a big week in the SEC and college basketball. We had some under the radar games. Tuesday, Tennessee got a 74-56 win over Georgia Southern. Honestly, probably a little worse than that. Charlie Henry, first-year coach at Georgia Southern. Georgia Southern, I think, is 0-10 now. He was an assistant at Alabama, coached with the Knicks a little bit, Bulls, I think, in the NBA. They'll be solid, but they're just not very good right now. You watch that game, and you're like, good gracious, Tennessee could have played their F game and won. Not kidding. Not kidding. Like, Georgia Southern's not a good basketball team, but Tennessee got a big win. Wednesday, last night, Mississippi State got the 85-81 win over Murray State. The Racers usually a pretty good team. Mississippi State, again, got good news. Tolu Smith starts practicing full contact on Friday, so that's big for the Bulldogs. LSU squeaking it out. Not squeaking. I mean, they would, just looking at it, 74-56. But Alabama State was up 4 at halftime. So LSU not very good right now, but again, they got to win. And then Auburn went to the Rocket City, played this game in Huntsville, got an 87-62 win over UNC Asheville. Watch the game. Auburn was relentless on defense yesterday, playing with their hair on fire. I keep saying that. But Katie Johnson, Dylan Cardwell, I was very impressed with them defensively. Bruce Pearl made them turn it up a notch when they made that trip to Huntsville. We had to turn that defensive level up a notch. I like Auburn's depth. I think they're one of the deeper teams. Them, Tennessee, and Kentucky, one of the 3 deepest teams in the SEC, I think, right now. I like Auburn. I like Auburn's basketball team this year. And they got a good squad. And we got a game going on right now. Florida, East Carolina. Looks like it's towards the end of the game. Obviously, I hadn't had a chance. I'm going to go back and watch the highlights of this one. Florida looks to be up 65-61 right now with 1:27 left in the second. Florida, I believe, we'll look at this upcoming weekend schedule. But Florida's got a big one yet with Michigan next Tuesday. That's what I thought. That'll be a big non-conference win for Florida. It still looks like Todd Golden trying to figure out his 10-man rotation. He likes to go deep. He's going to figure it out. They need that Michigan win. But a massive weekend on deck, as you can see. There's no games Friday. On Saturday, we got a big one. So LSU at Texas, 11 a.m. Central Standard Time Zone on ESPN2. This isn't the Texas team from last year. This is at Chris Beard's Texas, but they should be able to handle LSU at the Toyota Center. Texas A&M at Houston, big game here for both teams. Texas A&M would love to have this win. This is probably besides North Carolina, Kentucky, and Creighton, Alabama, this is probably the biggest one of the weekend. Yeah, for sure. Texas A&M at Houston. Can the SEC go into Houston back-to-back years like Alabama did last year and get a big win? Again, 1:30 p.m. tip-off Central Standard Time Zone on ESPN2. High Point heads to Athens at 4:30 on the SEC Network. The big one I talked about, North Carolina at Kentucky on CBS. This is one Kentucky would love to have. Getting Aaron Bradshaw back, Reed Shepherd. This is one to keep an eye on CBS at 4:30. Kentucky needs this non-conference win. This would be massive. Keep an eye on that one. Lipscomb at Arkansas at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time Zone. Charleston Southern, 5 p.m. Central Standard Time Zone in the SEC Network Plus. Cal heads to Oxford to face the only undefeated team in the SEC, the Ole Miss Rebels. Will you see Brandon Murray? I don't know. I would play him. What's the NCAA going to do? If I'm Chris Beard, I'm playing him. Ole Miss staring at being undefeated heading into their first conference game at Tennessee in a couple weeks. Tennessee should be able to handle business here. Vanderbilt heads to Texas Tech. Vanderbilt's just not a very good team. The two teams in the SEC that are just not very good right now are LSU and Vanderbilt. I think 1 through 12 are solid. When I was doing my power rankings and put Georgia at 12, I was like, Georgia's beating Wake Forest and Georgia Tech, and Georgia Tech's beating Duke and Mississippi State. They don't fight the 12th best team. I think I was talking to a buddy on the phone on the way home from work today. The SEC doesn't have that top-heavy team like they had with Alabama last year, but they're deeper. The league's deeper. Georgia's at 12 with some solid wins. Alabama at Creighton, big nightcap, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time Zone on national television on Fox. Creighton took a big loss, though, last night to UNLV on the road. So they'll be coming in. They didn't shoot as well. I watched it. They didn't shoot as well as they did last night. I expect them to get back into their own arena, their own gym, shoot better than they did last night. But Alabama, this is a real opportunity for Alabama because they stay west, Midwest, west. After that, they go to Arizona the next week. Alabama, I think, needs to get one of these next two, either Creighton or at Arizona. Obviously, I think Creighton is the more gettable game. So it's a big one for both Alabama and Creighton from an NCAA resume standpoint. Don't want to say any game in December is a must-win game. Because you look at Joe Lenardi's bracketology. He has 9 SEC teams in the tournament, by the way. That's tied with the Big 12 for the most. But it's a big non-conference game for both Alabama and Creighton. And then a late one, 9 p.m. Central Standard Time Zone, NC State at Tennessee on ESPN2. Tennessee should be able to hold serve at home against the Wolfpack. And I don't believe we got any matchups on Sunday. Oh, no, we do. Sorry. Oh, we got the big one. How did I totally forget about that? USC at Auburn, Bronny James. This is going to be apparently standing room only at Auburn Arena, at Neville Arena. So that'll be a big one on ESPN at noon Central Standard Time Zone. That's a big one. North Texas heading to Mississippi State, SEC Network Plus at 3 p.m. Central Standard Time Zone. And Seton Hall, under the radar game for the weekend. Seton Hall, not a bad team. Very winnable game from Missouri. I watched Seton Hall play. It's one of those Thanksgiving tournaments. I totally forgot. They're a solid team, though, out of the Big East. It's be a big win. It's be a big win for Dennis Gates and his Missouri team at home. A winnable game at 4 p.m. on ESPN. So probably the best weekend. I said it last weekend, but overall from top to bottom, you take Fridays, Saturdays matchups, Sundays matchups. Probably the best weekend of the season for the SEC in college basketball. The last big one before we get to conference play. But, woo! We covered a lot on this episode of Mach 10 Sports. We went around the SEC, covered a lot. Coaching changes. George Hilo is at Alabama, former Michigan coach. A lot of portal stuff going on. Look out for Ole Miss. Is red hot right now. I think they're going to be preseason top 10 easily heading into 24. Could be top 5 if they finish with some of these defensive front guys that they could potentially get out of the portal. I'm just telling you, keep an eye on Walter Nolan, Princely Yuma-Malayan, the edge guy, Florida's best edge guy, highest upside from an NFL standpoint from Florida. Walter Nolan, obviously, from Texas A&M. And then Tyler Barron, the edge defensive player from Tennessee. Could be one of Ole Miss's best defensive fronts they've had since 2008, the Houston Nutt era, like I mentioned. Again, we covered around the SEC, reviewed, looked at all 16 teams 2024 schedule with the addition of Tennessee, Oklahoma. That was revealed last night. A ton of great matchups to keep an eye on. Talked to NCAA. The 2-time transfer, is that over? Is it going to be unlimited free agency? I'm not going to say it's a bad thing, but just the word chaos in bold letters. CHAOS, just in bold. It's going to be chaos. Keep an eye on December 27th, because there's a 2-week restraining order on it right now. All college basketball can play these guys right now that have been sitting out. Brandon Murray from Ole Miss, LSU, Jalen Cook are the big SEC names to keep an eye on from that standpoint. I'd play them. Screw it. What's the NCAA going to do? They have no bite. And then finally, we reviewed the week that somewhat was in the SEC. Big weekend, though. Bama, Creighton, North Carolina, Kentucky, Tennessee, NC State, Houston, Texas A&M, LSU, Texas. Then Sunday, Bronny James heads to Auburn. If you're an Auburn guy, if you're in the Southeast, you want to see LeBron James' son, they're there, sold out. Sounds like it's standing room only. Mississippi State has a big one on Sunday. They got a solid matchup. And then you got Missouri with a winnable game against Seton Hall. So a lot. We haven't covered a lot, but again, it's the busiest time of the year, but also the most fun time of the year. But I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Got a lot of big things ahead. Portal still, big basketball weekend. I'll keep you updated. Hey, give us the like and subscribe on YouTube. Give us rate, review us. We're on all podcasting forums you could get. Apple, Spotify, Amazon, all of it. Hey, if you like the show, if you don't, tell us that too. Tell us where we can improve. But I appreciate you joining us for this episode of Mach 10 Sports. You have a fantastic weekend.